The year is approximately AD 30. The city is Jerusalem. The population has tripled for Passover week. Pilgrims from Egypt, from Babylon, from Rome, from every corner of the known world, pressing through gates and down streets that smell of animals and incense and unwashed bodies and roasting meat. And a man from Galilee walks into the temple. He does not walk in quietly. He does not take a seat and wait his turn. He looks at the tables, the licensed money changers, the approved dove sellers, the whole sacred economy humming along exactly as it was designed to, and something moves through him that the Gospel of John describes with one Greek word, kana, zeal, the kind that burns. He makes a whip out of cords. He overturns the tables. Coins ring off the stone floor like rain. Animals scatter. Sellers grab their inventory and run. And in the sudden silence of the outer courts of the most sacred building in the Jewish world, a man from a town nobody important had ever come from stands in the wreckage and says, "My house will be called a house of prayer. You have made it a den of robbers." Nobody stops him. That is the detail people miss. The temple guards were there, the priests were there, men with authority and muscle and legal standing were absolutely present in that courtyard, and not one of them physically stopped what was happening, because there was something about this man that made stopping him feel like the wrong idea. This is not a devotional. This is not a theology lecture. This is not a comfortable video. This is an honest attempt to answer the most unsettling question in human history. What would happen if he showed up today? And to answer that honestly, you have to meet who he actually was. Not the figure in the stained glass. Not the soft focus portrait above the baptistry. Not the gentle shepherd holding a lamb like he is posing for a greeting card. The man the Gospels actually describe, the one who made trained temple guards stand very still and do nothing. There is a question that has been asked for 2,000 years. Nobody who asked it honestly walked away unchanged. Not the Roman governor who had the power to free him and didn't. Not the fishermen who left their nets still wet on the dock. Not the scholar who came to find him in the dark because he was afraid to be seen asking in daylight. We will come back to that question. But first, you need to meet the man. The crowd that wanted to see Jesus was made up of the exact people Zacchaeus had spent his career exploiting. They were not moving, so he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree. A grown man, wealthy, powerful by the standards of his city, sitting in a tree on the side of the road like a child because he wanted to see. And Jesus walked under that tree and stopped and looked up. He said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Not a request, an announcement, in front of the crowd that hated him, in front of the people he had spent years taking from. Jesus invited himself to dinner with the traitor. And the Greek word used for how he said it is parrhesia, boldness, frank speech, speaking without fear of consequences. The crowd grumbled. The text is specific about that. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Jesus went anyway. Now take everything you just learned about this man, the overturned tables, the deliberate touch, the dinner with the traitor, and walk with me into the present, because he has not changed. And the present is about to get very uncomfortable. Before we walk him into the present, you need to understand something about who he was in his own time, because the modern versions of Jesus, the safe ones, the manageable ones, the ones that fit neatly inside a political platform or a self-help framework, those versions collapse the moment you read the actual text. So let's read the actual text. The first thing you notice about Jesus of Nazareth is that he was not from anywhere impressive. Galilee was the region Rome considered a backwater and Jerusalem considered suspect. When the apostle Nathanael first heard about him, his response was not awe, it was, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" That was the reputation. That was the address on the birth announcement of the man who would be called the Son of God. He was a carpenter's son, calloused hands, Aramaic speaking, brown, skinned, in the way that first-century Galilean Jews were, brown-skinned, not the pale, blonde figure of 15 centuries of European painting, but a man who looked like the region he came from. He owned nothing. He walked everywhere. And when he spoke, something happened in rooms that no one who was present could quite explain afterward. Stay with me, because what comes next is where this gets uncomfortable. The day he walked into the temple and overturned the tables was not an impulsive moment. It was not a bad day. It was a choice, and the religious establishment of Jerusalem understood immediately what it meant. Within days of that moment, the chief priests and the teachers of the law began looking for a way to kill him. Not because he had broken a law, because he had disrupted a system, and systems do not forgive disruption. But the temple was not the most radical thing he did that week. The most radical thing happened on a road outside the city, earlier in his ministry, and it involved a man no one wanted to stand near. His name is not given in the Gospel of Mark. He is identified only by his condition, leprosy, which in the first century meant not just a disease of the skin, but a sentence of total social death. Under Levitical law, a person with leprosy was required to live outside the city walls, required to announce his own uncleanness in public, to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," when anyone approached, so they could step away in time. Everything he touched became ritually contaminated. Every person he touched became ritually contaminated. He may not have been touched by another human being in years, and he came to Jesus, which itself required courage, because approaching a rabbi while unclean was a violation, and he said 11 words that have never left me since I first understood what they actually meant. If you are willing, you can make me clean. Not, can you? He had already settled the question of power. He had heard what Jesus did. He knew the answer to, can you? What he did not know, what years of isolation and rejection had worn down to a raw, bleeding uncertainty, was the answer to, will you? Not ability, desire. Is God willing? Does the God who made the rules that pushed me outside the walls want me back inside them? And here is what the Gospel of Mark records. Jesus was moved, some manuscripts say with compassion, some say with righteous indignation, at what this man had suffered. And he reached out his hand. The touch came before the healing. He chose contamination before he chose the miracle. He made himself ritually unclean on purpose, in public, for a man the entire religious system had declared untouchable. And then he said, I am willing, be clean, and the leprosy left him immediately. This is grief, if you let it land. Grief for everyone who has ever stood at the edge of the crowd and wondered whether God is able or whether God is willing. Grief for everyone who stopped asking, can he? Because the more honest question, the question they were afraid to ask out loud, was always, does he want to? He answered that question on a dusty road before he ever said a word. Now, the third scene. And this one is different from the first two, because this one is not about power, and it is not about suffering. This one is about a man who chose to be despised and then was surprised by grace. His name was Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in Jericho, which meant he was the most hated man in Jericho, and Jericho was a wealthy city, so there was a great deal to be hated for. He collected taxes for Rome from his own Jewish people. He was a collaborator, a traitor by cultural definition, and he had grown rich doing it. The crowd in Jericho did not just dislike Zacchaeus. They despised him with the specific, justified contempt reserved for people who sell out their own. And he wanted to see Jesus. He could not see over the crowd. He was short, the text tells us, in a detail so specific and undignified, it has the feel of genuine memory, and the crowd was not going to make room for him. Look at the pattern so far. He walked into the most powerful religious institution in his world and dismantled its economy in broad daylight. He touched a man the entire system had declared untouchable. Before the miracle, not after. He had dinner with the most despised man in a city full of people who had every reason to despise him. Every single time. He moved toward the people every respectable crowd moved away from. And every single time he disrupted the systems that kept them out. That pattern does not change when he walks into the present. If this is landing differently than you expected, that is the point. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And stay with me, because the modern encounters are where this gets personal. Let's do something that might make you uncomfortable. Let's take the Jesus of the Gospels, not a softened version, not a culturally adjusted version, but the actual one, and walk him into 4 rooms that exist right now, today, in the world you woke up in this morning. And let's be honest about what happens. The first room is a church, not a small one, a large one, the kind with a campus, multiple venues, a green room for the speaker, a security detail at the side entrance, a donor wall in the lobby with names engraved in bronze, a book table near the exit where you can purchase the senior pastor's latest title for $24.99. The kind of church that has a brand, a color palette, a carefully managed social media presence that has never once posted anything that would cost it a single follower. Jesus walks in, not through the lobby. He does not stop at the welcome desk. He walks straight to the platform, and he looks at what has been built in his name, and something moves through him that you have seen before. You saw it in the temple courtyard. You know what comes next. He does not flip the book table. He does not need to. He simply says what he said to the most respected religious leaders of his own day, in public, in the temple, to their faces. You tithe mint and dill and cumin, and you have neglected the more important matters, justice, mercy, faithfulness. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. You clean the outside of the cup and leave the inside full of greed and self-indulgence. You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, full of dead bones within. He said these things. They are in the text, and the men he said them to were not cartoonish villains. They were the theologically educated, the religiously serious, the institutionally powerful, the ones who had built something impressive in God's name, and somewhere along the way had started to confuse the building with the builder. But here is what most people miss. After the temple cleansing, after the overturned tables and the scattered coins and the silence, Jesus went back. The very next day, he returned to the temple and taught, and the blind and the lame came to him there, and he healed them in the same building he had just dismantled. He did not abandon the space. He reclaimed it for what it was supposed to be. He would do both, the disruption and the healing, the rebuke and the restoration, simultaneously in the same building, on the same week. That is not a Jesus who hates the church. That is a Jesus who loves it too much to let it become something else. The second room has no walls. It is everywhere and nowhere, a screen, a feed, a comment section, a trending topic, and in the middle of it, a person, not famous, not powerful, just someone whose worst moment has been screenshot, shared, and spread to people who were not there and do not know the full story. Defined entirely by a single failure, tried in public by people who have never met them, convicted by an algorithm that rewards outrage, and left standing in the wreckage of a reputation that took years to build and 48 hours to destroy. Jesus walks into that feed, and he does what he did in the temple courtyard 2,000 years ago. He kneels down in John chapter 8, when the crowd brought the woman caught in adultery and demanded her execution. He did not argue with the crowd. He did not make a speech. He knelt and wrote in the dirt. Scholars have debated for centuries what he wrote. The text does not tell us. What the text tells us is the effect. One by one, from the oldest to the youngest, the crowd left. And when they were gone, he stood up and said two things that the modern world has never been able to hold simultaneously. Neither do I condemn you. And go, leave your life of sin. No condemnation, and a call to change. In the same breath, to the same person, the world online can do one of these things. It can cancel without mercy, or it can excuse without accountability. It cannot do both at the same time. It does not have the moral architecture for both simultaneously. He did. He always has. And here's the grief in this. There are people watching this right now who have heard the second half of what he said, and never the first. People who have been told by religious voices what they must stop, what they must leave, what they must change, and never once heard him say first, neither do I condemn you, the order matters, grace before the call. Always, that is not soft theology. That is the sequence he chose, and he chose it deliberately. The third room is a government building, marble floors, flags, the particular silence of institutional power, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on the people who enter it, and reminds them that decisions are made here that they cannot undo. And in it, a politician, not a villain, that is important. The politician in the Gospels who encountered Jesus most directly was not a monster. He was a pragmatist. Pontius Pilate, Roman prefect of Judea, AD 26 to 36. We know he was real. In 1961, archaeologists excavating the Roman theater at Caesarea Maritima found a limestone block with a Latin inscription, the Pilate stone, bearing his name and his title, Praefectus Iudaeae, prefect of Judea. Tacitus, the Roman historian, confirms in his annals that Pilate executed Jesus during the reign of Tiberius. A hostile source, no theological motivation, just a Roman historian recording what happened. Pilate examined Jesus, questioned him, and reached a verdict. I find no basis for a charge against this man. He said it 3 times, 3 separate declarations of innocence, and then he handed Jesus over to be crucified anyway, because the crowd was pressing, because a riot was forming, because the politically expedient thing and the just thing were pointed in opposite directions, and Pilate, like most politicians in most eras, chose expedience. He asked one question before he left the room, just one. What is truth? He did not wait for the answer. He walked back out to the crowd. Pay attention to this, because Pilate is not an ancient figure. Pilate is the room. Pilate is the press conference, where the right thing is acknowledged and the wrong thing is done anyway. Pilate is every moment of institutional cowardice, dressed in the language of procedural necessity. He is the most modern man in the Gospels, and he is everywhere. We are almost at the answer to his question. Hold on. The 4th room is the one that hurts the most, because it is not a building, it is a crowd. and the crowd loved him. John chapter 6. Jesus has just fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The crowd is electric. They want to take him by force and make him king. This is the moment every political movement dreams of: mass enthusiasm, popular mandate, the people demanding you lead them. He withdrew, alone, to a mountain. The next day the crowd found him on the other side of the lake, and he looked at them and said something that no algorithm would ever recommend. "You are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." He called out their motives, to their faces, in public, when he was at the height of his popularity. And then he gave the hard sermon, the one about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and the crowd that had wanted to crown him began to thin. John chapter 6, verse 60.6. The verse number is not lost on anyone who has read this far. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Here is the part nobody tells you. He watched them leave. He felt the departure. The text makes that clear in the question. He turns to the 12 immediately afterward. "You do not want to leave too, do you?" There is something in that question that is not the voice of a man who is indifferent to being left. He noticed the empty space. He felt the crowd thin, and he did not change the sermon. He would go viral on Monday. He would be misunderstood by Wednesday. He would be canceled by Friday, not because he failed to communicate. He was the greatest communicator who ever lived, but because he never once shaped his message around what the crowd wanted to hear. He shaped it around what was true, and truth, in every era, eventually clears the room of everyone who came for the loaves. The question is, now we come to the 2 encounters that do not happen in public, not in a temple courtyard, not in a government building, not in front of a crowd or a feed or a comment section. These 2 encounters happen in the places where no one is watching, which is precisely where Jesus was most dangerous, because the public Jesus disrupted systems, but the private Jesus disrupted people, and a disrupted system can be rebuilt. A disrupted person never goes back to exactly who they were before. The first encounter happens on a road, in a crowd, in the middle of the day, and the person at the center of it did everything in her power to be invisible. Her name is not given in the Gospel of Luke. She is identified only by what had been happening to her body for 12 years. A hemorrhage, a continuous bleeding that under Levitical law made her ritually unclean every single day for 12 years, which meant that for 12 years she could not enter the temple, could not participate in worship, could not touch another person without making them unclean. She had spent everything she had on physicians. Luke, himself a doctor, records this with the particular honesty of a man who knows what that means. And she had not gotten better. She had gotten worse. 12 years of isolation. 12 years of being the person in the room that everyone subtly shifted away from. 12 years of watching the religious world continue without her, because the condition of her body had placed her permanently outside its doors. And then she heard about Jesus. She did not approach him directly. She did not call out to him the way blind Bartimaeus did, the way the leper did, the way Zacchaeus did from his tree. She came from behind, in a crowd pressing from every side, in the noise and the dust and the bodies. She reached out one hand and touched the hem of his garment, the tzitzit, the prayer fringe that a Jewish man wore at the corners of his cloak as a sign of covenant faithfulness, and she touched it from behind in the hope that no one would notice. She was hoping to take the miracle and disappear, and he stopped. in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of a journey, with the press of hundreds of bodies around him, he stopped and said, "Who touched me?" His disciples looked at him the way you look at someone who has just said something baffling. "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you from every side, and you ask who touched you." But he said, "Someone touched me. I felt power go out from me." He felt her in a crowd of hundreds. He felt the specific reach of one desperate, invisible woman who had been reaching for 12 years and had never been felt by anyone. She came forward trembling, fell at his feet, told him everything, in public, in front of the crowd, the whole story she had been hiding, and he listened to all of it. And when she was finished, he said one word before anything else. Not, "You are healed." Not, "Your faith worked." Not a clinical pronouncement or a theological explanation. He said, "Daughter." Think about what that word cost him to say in that moment. She was ritually unclean. He had just allowed her to touch him, which made him ritually unclean. He was on his way to raise a dead girl, and now he was publicly, deliberately, in front of witnesses, claiming this woman, this 12-year outcast, as family. "Daughter, you are my daughter." In a crowd, out loud. And here is the modern bridge, because this is not an ancient story. This is the story of every person who has ever tried to take what they needed from God without being seen doing it. Every person who has sat in the back row of a church for years, hoping the grace would somehow reach them without anyone noticing they needed it. Every person who has prayed in the dark because praying in the light felt too exposed. Every person who came from behind, reached out in the crowd, and hoped to be invisible. He stops for those people. Every time, he feels the reach. You can try to be invisible with him. You cannot succeed. The second private encounter happens at night. His name was Nicodemus, member of the Sanhedrin, the 70-man Jewish ruling council that held the highest religious authority in Judea, a Pharisee, a teacher of Israel, which Jesus himself acknowledges. A man of genuine learning, genuine power, and genuine questions that his position made it dangerous to ask in daylight. So he came at night. The Gospel of John uses the Greek word nuktos, specifically nighttime, the darkest part, and most scholars read this not just as a timestamp, but as a theological signal. Nicodemus came in the dark in more than one sense. He came with questions he could not afford to be seen asking. He came with the particular hunger of a man who has built an impressive religious life and has begun to suspect in the quiet hours that something essential is missing from it. And Jesus did not ease him in, did not start with common ground or shared vocabulary or the kind of diplomatic preamble that powerful men expect when they come asking questions. He said, "No one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." Not consider, not perhaps reflect on. Unless, a door with a single condition, from the most gentle man in the Gospels, delivered to a sincere and powerful inquirer, in private, with no crowd to perform for, the most demanding sentence in the entire conversation. Nicodemus pushes back, asks how, tries to understand, and Jesus opens into one of the most quoted passages in the entire Bible, John chapter 3, verse 16. Right there, in the dark, to an audience of one, the all-time verse, for one man, at night, who came afraid, and then the text goes quiet on Nicodemus for a while. We do not hear from him again until chapter 7, where he makes a small, cautious procedural argument in Jesus' defense in the Sanhedrin. Almost invisible, easily missed, a man testing the water. But then comes chapter 19. The crucifixion is over. The crowd has gone home. The disciples have scattered, every single one of them, hiding behind locked doors. And in the evening, two men come to claim the body of an executed criminal. One is Joseph of Arimathea, the other is Nicodemus. And Nicodemus brings 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. Now, the question, Pilate asked it 2,000 years ago and walked away before the answer came. He stood in a room with truth and asked, "What is truth?" and then went back to the crowd, because the crowd was louder and more immediate and more dangerous to ignore. But you have been sitting with this for 22 minutes. You have seen the temple. You have seen the leper on the road. You have seen Zacchaeus in his tree. You have seen the megachurch and the canceled woman and the politician and the crowd that left when the sermon got hard. You have seen the woman who tried to be invisible and was called daughter out loud. You have seen Nicodemus in the dark and in the light. This is not a question about religion. This is not a question about church attendance. This is not a question about what you believe intellectually about a set of ancient documents. This is a question about whether you would recognize him if he walked into your actual life, today, this week, in the specific circumstances you woke up inside this morning, and whether, if you did recognize him, you would let him stay. Pilate's question is no longer Pilate's question. It is yours. 3 things, and I need you to hear all 3. The first is this. The Jesus of the Gospels was not safe, not comfortable, and not manageable. He disrupted every institution he entered. He offended every crowd eventually. He said things that cost him followers at the height of his popularity, and said them anyway. He touched people the system had declared untouchable. He ate with people the respectable had declared unreachable. He walked into the most powerful rooms of his world and said the truest thing in them regardless of what it cost him, that Jesus has not changed. Not one word, not one instinct, not one habit of moving toward the people every respectable crowd moves away from. The second is this. If he walked into your life today, not into a church building, not onto a screen, not into a theological discussion, but into your actual Monday, your actual Tuesday, the specific version of your life that exists behind the version you show other people, he would already know everything. The thing you curate away, the question you only ask in the dark, the reach you make from behind, in a crowd, hoping not to be noticed. And he would be standing there anyway, not to expose you, not to perform your healing for an audience, just present, knowing everything, staying anyway. The third thing is the one that has never left me. The most repeated command in the 4 Gospels is not be good. It is not be religious. It is not have correct theology or attend faithfully or build something impressive in my name. The most repeated thing he said to individual human beings, one at a time, face to face, on roads and in houses and beside water and in the middle of crowds, was 2 words. Follow me, not follow a doctrine, not follow an institution, not follow a set of principles extracted from my teaching and applied at a comfortable distance. Follow me, present tense, personal, directional, requiring you to move. He said it to fishermen with wet hands on a dock they never saw again. He said it to a tax collector sitting at a booth in the middle of his workday. He said it to a scholar in the dark, and to a woman at a well, and to a man who had been lying beside a healing pool for 38 years, waiting for someone else to put him in. He is still saying it. The question has never been whether he would show up. He showed up 2,000 years ago, and nobody who met him stayed exactly the same. The fishermen left their nets, the tax collector left his booth, the woman left her water jar, Nicodemus left his darkness. The question has always been the same question it was then. What do you do when he does? Which encounter in this video felt most personal to you? The megachurch, the canceled woman, the crowd that left, or Nicodemus coming in from the dark? Tell me below, because I read every single one.